What's up, ceramic students? Welcome back for another day of work on our coil building piece. Now that we've got the sort of first day or two of kind of rush, panic, get the pinch pot pulled out and get their first few coils laid down, we're sort of entered into somewhat of a slow assembly period. Coil built pieces in some ways are faster than, say, the hand building pinch pot method. We're constantly sort of negotiating the dry times of this, right? Put a couple coils on, then wait. Put a couple more coils on, then wait. And the wait period is all about kind of waiting for it to stiffen up, waiting for it to dry. The dryness kind of gives structure, especially if we're bellying the pot out a little bit before we come back in. We need that underlying piece to have a good structure to it. So be patient with your work over the next couple of days. It may feel like, on days where you're bellying out, like you're just not getting anything done because you can only get a couple of coil layers on before you have to start that dry times. You can do a couple of things to help speed that process along a little bit. Something like a box fan, like we have in the studios, is sort of a cold air way of kind of speeding up the evaporation a little bit. You can introduce just a bit of heat with a blow dryer. That sort of speeds things along. Just be careful if you use a little heater or a blow dryer, because if it gets away from you and it gets too dry, that's it. The piece will have to be started over. You can't add wet clay from your block to a piece that's leather hard, like just beyond leather hard even, but definitely not greenware pieces. You cannot get wet clay to stick to greenware or bone dry clay. So I've done the first tutorial on this. Now I'm back for the second tutorial. I've probably got 20 minutes or an hour worth of actual work on this, but a lot of dry time in between. And so what I'll take a look at now is actually the ribbed sort of coil look on the outside and the inside. Even though I was sort of careful to pinch out and compress all the coils, I still can see the seams. Now, if you did a really good job of scoring and slipping, and you've sort of pinched it out really nicely, those seams aren't going to open up, right? They're probably just cosmetic. You can see where the coils were sort of kissed together, but that's not going to open up. So we've got a couple things we can do. We could just leave it the way it is and sort of expose the way the pot was built. That's sort of a nice way of sort of showing your hand as a craftsperson, is not trying to hide the methods that you used in order to assemble a thing. Similar look would be like finger marks inside of a wheel thrown vessel, or something like that, where it's not necessarily critical to sort of hide all that. If, though, you think that you would like to strengthen your piece a little bit, or just kind of smooth the outside, today I'll spend just a little bit of time showing you how to remove some of those coil markings. So before I add any coils today, I'll go through a sort of a smoothing demonstration for how to get rid of these coil spots, and then I'll add a few more coils on at the end of the tutorial. And then I'm sort of really excited to see where you guys are at in the studio with your pieces and help you guide through sort of decisions on what to do as your pot starts to grow. Now, I demonstrated in the previous tutorial sort of a low-tech solution for kind of giving it a low friction sort of turntable effect, just a small scrap of some of the 4mm plastic sheeting that we use to cover our clay. If you're in the studios and you'd like to borrow one of the turntables, that's totally fair. I've got a few of these larger cake decorating turntables around. If you'd like to actually purchase one of these things, I'm happy to share you the link. I'm sure you'll be able to find it, though. You get a whole cake decorating kit for like 15 bucks on Amazon, so totally worth it for doing sort of rotational work in the studio. So let's use the scoring rib first, and you're going to score right along the same direction as your coils. So you're scoring in the direction of the coil lines. Essentially, we're wounding the clay, and we need to sort of mess up the surface, kind of scratch the surface of the clay first. Essentially, we're blending all of those coil lines away, slowly kind of melding them back into the surface of the clay itself. And I'm doing this upside down on my piece because I get a little bit easier access to it. It also feels like it supports itself a bit better if it's upside down. This is something that you really can't do if your piece is still really wet. It's got to have some stiffness to it so that it doesn't just fall apart on you. once I've gone a few times around the pot with the coils, now I'm going to go in opposition to the coils, or sort of against the grain. And if I've got a turntable here, what I really like to do is sort of get my left hand sort of slowly rotating the piece for me, and my right hand doing the scoring, and sort of fall into a bit of a rhythm. And before long, you've sort of gone all the way around a couple times. That sort of rhythm is such an important part of most kind of handmade crafts. If you talk to craftspeople, before long they'll eventually talk to you about the sort of mindless, repetitive rhythm that they get into with their work, whether that's sanding or scoring or shaping or painting, brushstrokes. It's just part of the handmade process that things progress slowly and you kind of get into this somewhat mechanical mode with the work. So now I'm going to flip my scoring and smoothing tool over to its smoothing edge, and I'll smooth maybe in the direction of the coils one time around. And right now I'm being very careful to sort of look and see if I've done a good job of blending those coils away. If I can already tell that I haven't really hidden those coil lines, I'll go back in and just sort of score a bit more on the top. If the piece has sort of dried out a little bit too far and it's not smoothing very easily, you could sort of put a little bit of moisture on the clay at this point, and the scoring just works a lot better. Okay, so I'm not going to go too much further than that. I've got so many more coils to lay on that I'm not going to try to make this pot look perfect. But I just wanted to show you the idea that you can start smoothing coils sort of as you go. The smoothed coils change the way the outside of the pot looks, really cleans it up. But then also, if you're a little nervous about your scoring and slipping work, you think that it could have maybe been not quite so strong, smoothing the outside actually adds a bit of strength to your clay, because you're actually blending all of the surface clay together. You kind of build a little bit of surface weld to the whole piece. Okay, so turn this over, and always kind of keep in mind this is a hand-built piece. Hand-built pieces, they have the same sort of pinch-potted like actions, right? If you've deformed your piece at all, doing any surface smoothing or anything, just go ahead and reform the piece using those same pinch pot techniques. And now I'm going to roll out a few coils and start adding a few more layers to the piece. Remember, the surface of your canvas boards are really absorbent and they're going to steal moisture out of the clay, so give it a couple of light spritzes with water. And only roll out as much clay as you think you can use, and a couple of coils. This is not going to be a big race for who can get done fastest. I want you guys to sort of have a good amount of control over your pieces, and control is a pretty slow game in the ceramic studio. So I'm much more interested in quality than the sort of quantity or the height or the size of this thing. We're pretty limited with the size of our damp boxes, so I'm not super concerned you guys are going to go build crazy on me, but keep that in mind. We can only go out so far and you can only go up so far, so what can you do with the shape of your pot that will allow you to have some more control in your pinch pot? What could you do with the form that would bring interest, even though the form is limited to the size of our bins? If you're really dying to go a little bit larger, you're welcome to sort of find an alternate bin, find an alternate sort of storage container. In the previous tutorial, I mentioned that a small bucket can work really, really well in terms of nice little damp storage. I really like the clear bins because I can see into them. An upside-down bucket is not an uncommon thing in my studio, and so I might accidentally mistake it for something else and pull the lid off and knock my piece over. If the clear bins are around, I can see through them and I know exactly what's in there. As I'm brushing that slip onto the coils, I'm using kind of a dabbing motion. The dabbing prevents me from accidentally collapsing all of my coils, or all of my score marks. The score marks need to be sort of jagged in order to get the whole thing to stitch together. And I'll do my best to make sure that I'm starting about where I left off. And I'm just about ready to sort of turn the corner on my pot in a way where I've come out maybe an inch from my original pinch pot, and I'm ready to start kind of rounding the corner, creating the shoulder, and heading in toward what I'll call the neck of my pot. Now, all that language of sort of describing the shape of a pot is sort of a way of helping me think about how the pot moves. Sort of a belly is sort of the fat or expanded part of a pot form. The shoulder is often referring to a turn, and the neck is somewhere near the spout or the opening, and it's usually the sort of tightest, or what we might call the most choked part of the piece. So that language you'll hear me use fairly often in the studio. So I'm probably not going to add too many more coils. I'm just going to let this sit for a moment or two, maybe give it a few minutes in front of the fan. But what I'm doing before I do that is just giving it one last sort of pinch. This pinch is helping align the coils. I'm also compressing the edges a little bit. I'm pinching them and actually kind of getting a little bit more height out of those coils. So this is sort of where we're at now. We're at this point in the piece where we might be able to add a couple coils, then wait. Then add a couple coils, then wait. And in that wait time, you could sort of think about what you want to do with the form. I like to sort of sit back and look at it and kind of eye up the form in profile and see where it's going. Maybe take a look down the line, and if I see any inconsistencies with the line around the edge, just sort of put a finger on the inside and a finger on the outside, and just sort of keep deforming the pot until it starts to come into alignment. It's still essentially a big pinch pot, and so you can keep working it until it hits that too dry phase. Now, ideally, we'll keep this sort of working area of the clay always within the leather hard range. You'll notice that as you begin to work on this over a course of a few days, your base will likely become pretty dry. So if it needs a little spray on the inside to keep it leather hard, go ahead and do that. The moisture that comes from the spray bottle will get absorbed right into the clay. You'll see it happen. And so if it's really sucking up a lot of water, you can give it just a little bit more. But remember, as the clay is drying, it's stiffening up and giving you that strength. And so don't overspray it. You want to keep your clay always kind of marching towards leather hard. And then once it's leather hard, you want to sort of keep it there. We'll keep the pot more or less at leather hard until we're completely done with it. And done with it is going to mean not just constructing, but also doing a bit of surface work, surface decoration work. I'll come back and check up on this pot in maybe 15-20 minutes or so and add a few more coils before we wrap up this tutorial. So I've done a couple more coils here. I've stacked onto the piece, and I'm sort of carefully managing my dry times where I'm giving it a little time in front of the fan and then coming back to work on it. I haven't smoothed since I did the first smoothing at the beginning of this tutorial, so I've got about 4 layers or so of coils, and I probably should, before I get too much higher, stop and smooth those coils. I think I'll add one more coil and then make sure that I smooth it before putting it away for the night. A couple things I wanted to show you. Since the beginning of the pot was made, now hours ago, right? Especially since I have been waiting a few, there's been a 24-hour period of like gap in time between working on it. The bottom is probably about as dry as I want it to get. So if I set it in front of the fan, I don't want it to get any more dry. And so what I'll do is maybe while I'm working is instead of always having to like continually spray it, it might rehydrate it, putting a little scrap of plastic on the inside that will slow down the evaporation. And then I can also wrap a little collar of plastic around the base just to kind of keep it frozen at that humidity. I could just as easily spray it. I just don't really like the idea of spraying a piece that's right where I want it. Right, I don't want to make it any. I don't want to hydrate it anymore. As I start to hydrate this work, it is going to get weaker and weaker, and I don't want that. Not at this point. So. Use the plastic. It sort of saves you from having to run and find a spray bottle somewhere. And you can just cut a little scrap of plastic off of one of your large sheets. Now I'm getting probably pretty close to the maximum height that our small bins are going to allow. And so I could start to think about where I want to go with this piece in order to finish it. Right now, I've sort of turned the corner. It takes a couple of coils in order to kind of get that corner to smooth out completely. And as I spend more time smoothing out the walls and kind of pinch potting out those dimensions, I'm really starting to consider, okay, what might a finished rim look like? Is this an open bowl, or does this bowl have a little bit more of a sort of a choked form? And so what I eventually will do with this piece is sort of come in from the shoulder and bring it into the inside. But because that work, anytime you kind of turn in from a shoulder of a pot, it requires a really nice stable dry base. I can't do that today. I think I'll let this sit overnight and come back and join you guys tomorrow to work on it. And overnight I'll let it dry in the bin with a plastic sheet. That way it sort of gives it a chance to stiffen up before I put my hands on it again. For you guys, what you should be thinking about is just carefully managing those times, smoothing every few coils or so, and then shaping as you go. Don't let your kind of excitement about adding more and more coils get in the way of the sort of careful forming of the pot. Add a coil or two, and then spend some time sort of working down the coils and forming those edges. Look at it from the side. If you happen to have a banding wheel or one of these turning work stands, you can sort of get a view of the line of your pot on the side there. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to do a little bit of coil smoothing, and then I'll join you guys again in the next tutorial. Catch up with you in the studio.